Stanton says, "We can't put that on the air. That's just too frightening." And he didn't have to say another word. I mean, that was that. And this is the first time that I made a presentation there that got turned down.
A show CBS called Too Scary for Kids, a dog named after Frank Sinatra, and the longest-running Saturday morning cartoon that almost never existed. This is Scooby-Doo, the franchise that survived 2 rejections, a cancellation, and a voice actor who quit over a fast food commercial. Behind those meddling kids and predictable mysteries was chaos nobody saw coming. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts you never knew about Scooby-Doo, the political assassination that created it, the recycled voice that destroyed a man's throat, the lawsuit threats, and the stuff you never noticed even after watching hundreds of episodes. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to TV Time Capsule for deep dives into the cartoons that raised us. Let's get into it with number 15. Number 15. The impossible dog that made animators threaten to quit. The original pitch for Scooby-Doo had no talking dog. The show was called Mysteries 5 and featured 5 teenagers in a rock band who solved mysteries between gigs. The dog came later when CBS executive Fred Silverman decided the show needed something more. Designer Iwao Takamoto broke every rule of 1960s television animation when he created Scooby-Doo. The standard technique was limited animation, which saved money by only moving parts that absolutely had to move. Most cartoon characters wore collars to hide where the head cell separated from the body cell. Their faces had muzzle lines so the mouth could be animated separately. Takamoto designed Scooby without a muzzle line, no facial separation points. The teenage characters also had no collar breaks. Animators complained it was impossible to animate efficiently. The design meant fuller animation, requiring significantly more cell work than standard television cartoons. The workload increased roughly 50%. Longer hours, more hand strain, potential carpal tunnel issues. Takamoto later admitted the design accidentally influenced the entire show's animation quality because they couldn't cut corners the way other studios did. What should have been a cheap Saturday morning cartoon ended up looking more expensive than anything else on television. The impossible dog that animators said couldn't work efficiently became the most famous cartoon character Hanna-Barbera ever created. Sometimes the worst idea turns out to be the best idea. Number 14. CBS called it too scary. While kids watched real murders on TV, CBS rejected the show in 1969 for being too frightening for young viewers. The year was 1969. Kids were watching footage of Vietnam War casualties on the evening news. Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot the year before. Robert F. Kennedy had been shot 2 months before the show was pitched. Real murders, real violence, real bodies on television screens every single night. But a cartoon ghost? Too scary for children. CBS, President Frank Stanton saw presentation artwork for a show called Who's SS Scared and decided it would traumatize young viewers. He rejected it completely, leaving executive Fred Silverman without a centerpiece for the entire 1969 to 1970 Saturday morning lineup. The rejection happened during what sociologists call a moral panic. After RFK's murder in June 1968, President Johnson created a national commission on the causes and prevention of violence. Parent groups like Action for Children's Television immediately started protesting Saturday morning cartoons. Hanna-Barbera's Action, shows like Space Ghost, The Herculoids, and Birdman got canceled by 1969. The studio lost millions in licensing fees. CBS demanded non-violent programming while simultaneously broadcasting war footage at dinner time. The network called cartoon monsters too scary for kids who were literally watching people die on the news. Silverman went back to the creators and told them to make it more comedic. They toned down the artwork, dropped the rock band element,
We'll call it Scooby-Doo and move him up front, and it'll be the dog show.
and focused more on Shaggy and the dog. CBS finally approved it. The show that was too scary for 1969 became comfort food for a generation of traumatized children. Kids learned that monsters weren't real, that every mystery had a rational explanation. Number 13. Frank Sinatra, named Scooby-Doo on a smoke-filled red-eye flight. The dog was still called Too Much when Fred Silverman got on a red-eye flight to a development meeting in 1969. This was back when you could smoke on planes. The cabin would have been filled with cigarette smoke, passengers lighting up constantly during overnight flights. Silverman was listening to Frank Sinatra's Strangers in the Night, probably at 3 in the morning, definitely exhausted. At the end of the song, Sinatra scats "doo-be-doo-be-doo" in that signature ad-lib that made the recording famous. Silverman, sleep-deprived and nicotine-saturated, had his moment. He decided to rename the dog Scooby-Doo and retitle the entire show Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? One moment on an overnight flight created a billion-dollar franchise name. That's the official story Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, the show's creators, have told for decades. Except, there's another version. Writer Mark Evanier has suggested the name might have actually come from Joe Barbera, who was a massive Frank Sinatra fan, and may have suggested it to make Silverman like the project more. Other theories point to the song Denise by Randy and the Rainbows. The truth is nobody knows for certain which story is accurate.
We'll call it Scooby-Doo and move him up front, and it'll be the dog show.
The Sinatra flight story became legend because it's better for press releases. Famous crooner inspires famous cartoon dog. Perfect narrative. Number 12, RFK's murder created the cartoon that comforted a generation. June 5th, 1968. Robert F. Kennedy was shot in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. He died the next day. The country was already reeling from Martin Luther King Jr.'s murder 2 months earlier. Within hours, President Lyndon B. Johnson announced the appointment of a national commission on the causes and prevention of violence. The commission's formal findings wouldn't be shared until late 1969, but the immediate response was massive. Parent organizations that had been quietly complaining about television violence suddenly had political momentum. The National Parent-Teacher Association got emboldened. McCall's magazine provided step-by-step instructions for readers to pressure broadcast networks to discontinue violent programming. Media studies scholar Heather Hendershot later explained that even those critical of Kennedy's politics supported censorship efforts. Regulating TV violence in his name for the good of children was treated like a tribute to the fallen senator. Hanna-Barbera was the biggest producer of animated television at the time. Their Saturday morning lineup included Space Ghost, Birdman, and the Galaxy Trio, the Herculoids, and other action-adventure shows. Virtually all of them were canceled by 1969 because of pressure from parent groups. The financial impact was devastating. Millions in licensing fees gone. The studio faced potential bankruptcy. Fred Silverman at CBS was desperately looking for a show that would revitalize Saturday morning ratings while pleasing the activists serving as advisors to animation studios. The result was Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? A show where kids were never in real danger and monsters were always fake. A political assassination created the conditions for a wholesome cartoon that would comfort millions of children for the next 50 years. Number 11. The voice actors got exactly the opposite roles they wanted. Casey Kasem walked into the 1969 audition wanting to voice Fred Jones, the heroic leader, the guy who drove the mystery machine, the one who always had a plan. That's the role Kasem wanted. Frank Welker showed up wanting to voice Shaggy Rogers, the goofy slacker, the scaredy cat best friend to the dog. That's what Welker auditioned for. The directors switched them. No detailed explanation was ever given. They just decided Kasem should be Shaggy, and Welker should be Fred, and that was that. Kasem reportedly hated the Shaggy voice at first. He thought it was too silly, too over the top for a character he'd be voicing in what he assumed would be a short-lived Saturday morning cartoon. But he committed anyway because he needed the job, and that goofy voice became his defining career role for over 40 years. Welker got stuck with Fred, the straight man, the least interesting character in the group. The leader who never got the funny lines, never got character development, just stood there looking handsome and making plans. But he made it work and is now the only original cast member still voicing his character today, over 55 years later. Don Messick voiced Scooby-Doo, and if his voice sounded familiar to anyone who'd watched The Jetsons, that's because it was nearly identical to Astro. Same speech patterns, same R sounds, same vocal quality. Hanna-Barbera knew it, didn't care, and saved money by having Messick essentially recycle his own work from 7 years earlier. Number 10. Scooby's voice was recycled from another cartoon and destroyed his throat. Don Messick didn't just voice Scooby-Doo. He was also Astro on the Jetsons, Muttley the Snickering Dog, Dr. Benton Quest, and dozens of space aliens in 1960s Hanna-Barbera cartoons. The man had range, but he specialized in doing weird voices for non-human characters. Scooby's speech pattern required Messick to do that distinctive R sound over and over.
I'm Shaggy, Shaggy.
Roo-row, raggy. Every line had those exaggerated consonants that required specific throat and mouth positioning. Recording sessions for a single episode could take hours. Messick would do take after take, getting the R sounds just right, making sure Scooby's voice stayed consistent. For 28 years, from 1969 to 1997, he did this. The physical toll of voice acting is something most people don't consider. It's straining your vocal cords in unnatural ways, holding weird mouth shapes, projecting in directions your voice wasn't designed to go. Do that for decades, and damage accumulates. Messick also had a smoking habit, which he admitted contributed to the raspy quality of Scooby's voice. The combination of cigarettes and decades of vocal strain created chronic problems. Colleagues later mentioned he'd had ongoing throat issues in his final years. He died in 1997 at the age of 71. After his death, the Scooby voice passed to Scott Innes, then to Frank Welker in 2002, who voices both Fred and Scooby-Doo now. Welker uses a slightly different approach to the voice, one that's reportedly easier on the throat. The recycled Astro voice that nobody minded became more iconic than the original, and the man who created it paid a physical price that most fans never knew about. Number 9, Casey Kasem quit over a burger and held the franchise hostage. In the mid-1990s, Burger King wanted Shaggy Rogers in a commercial promoting their fast food chain. Standard licensing deal. Easy money for everyone involved. Except Casey Kasem was a strict vegetarian who opposed fast food companies and meat consumption. Hanna-Barbera told him to do it anyway. It was just a commercial. It would take maybe 2 hours of his time. The paycheck would be substantial. Kasem refused. He said putting Shaggy in a Burger King commercial violated his personal ethics. Hanna-Barbera pushed back, saying his contract required him to voice Shaggy for approved commercial work. Kasem gave them an ultimatum: make Shaggy a vegetarian in the show, reflecting Kasem's own values, or he walks. Hanna-Barbera said no. Making a character who's famous for eating everything in sight suddenly refuse meat would be ridiculous. In 1997, Casey Kasem quit. After 28 years of voicing Shaggy Rogers, he walked away from the show entirely. Hanna-Barbera replaced him with Billy West, then Scott Innes. Fans hated both of them. The voice was wrong, the energy was off, and ratings started dropping. By 2002, the producers were developing What's New, Scooby-Doo, and wanted Kasem back, so they caved completely. They agreed to make Shaggy a vegetarian. Kasem returned with conditions. From that point forward, when Shaggy ate pizza, it had vegetables instead of pepperoni. Instead of hamburgers, he'd eat elaborate peanut butter sandwiches. The change was subtle, but canonical. One commercial dispute over a fast food chain changed the character forever. Kasem's personal ethics became Shaggy's dietary restrictions. And Burger King never got their commercial. Number 8, the show that ripped off. Dobie Gillis became more famous than Dobie Gillis. If you've ever watched The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, the 1959 to 1963 sitcom, Scooby-Doo will look extremely familiar. The character parallels aren't subtle at all. Fred Jones is Dobie Gillis, the well-meaning but somewhat clueless leader. Daphne Blake is Thalia Menninger, the beautiful girl everyone wants. Velma Dinkley is Zelda Gilroy, the smart but socially awkward one. And Shaggy Rogers is Maynard G. Krebs, the beatnik slacker played by Bob Denver. The Maynard to Shaggy connection is especially blatant. Maynard would shout the word work with his voice cracking in horror at the mere concept of employment. Shaggy shouts zoinks with his voice cracking in terror at monsters. Both characters are cowardly. Both are obsessed with food. Both have that same nervous energy and tendency to panic. The personalities are nearly identical, just transplanted from a live-action sitcom to an animated mystery show. Joe Ruby and Ken Spears have openly acknowledged that Dobie Gillis was the template for Scooby-Doo's teenage characters. They weren't trying to hide it. The show was pitched as a comedic mystery-solving show based on Dobie Gillis characters, and that's exactly what they delivered. Whether Bob Denver's vocal performance directly influenced Casey Kasem's portrayal of Shaggy is unclear. Kasem never publicly acknowledged it, and Denver died in 2005 without commenting on the similarity. The legal department at Hanna-Barbera and CBS must have determined it was fine, because no lawsuit ever materialized. Character archetypes aren't protected by copyright the same way specific expressions are. Number 7. 65% of all kids watched it. Then, CBS canceled it anyway. September 13th, 1969, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. The first episode of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, titled What a Night for a Night, premiered on CBS. The ratings were insane. 65% of all Saturday morning television viewers tuned in, not 65% of CBS viewers. 65% of everyone watching television during that time slot across all networks. CBS executives were shocked. They'd barely approved the show after 2 rejections. Now, it was dominating Saturday mornings in a way they hadn't seen in years. The network renewed it immediately for a second season. Season 1 produced 17 episodes. Season 2 produced 8 more. The show was still pulling massive ratings. Kids loved it, parents approved of it, and advertisers were happy. Then, in 1970, CBS canceled it. No explanation, no warning. Just done. The cast was confused. Frank Welker later said they all thought the show was a hit. The ratings supported that belief, but networks make decisions based on factors beyond just ratings. And whatever those factors were, they led to cancellation after only 25 episodes. In 1971, only reruns aired. No new content was produced. The show seemed dead. But something strange happened. The reruns kept pulling strong numbers. Kids watched the same 25 episodes over and over without getting bored. The predictable formula that critics mocked became a feature, not a bug. By 1972, CBS brought the show back as the new Scooby-Doo movies with a different format. Episodes were 44 minutes instead of 22, and featured celebrity guest stars like Batman and the Harlem Globetrotters. The cancellation that should have killed Scooby-Doo actually saved it. Reruns kept the show alive long enough to prove it had staying power. Number 6. Every episode was identical because the writers were lazy. Every single episode of Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Followed the exact same structure. The mystery machine breaks down. The gang ends up near a large, mostly vacated property like a ski lodge, hotel, factory, or mansion. The property has a monster problem. The kids investigate. The monster chases them. They set a trap. The monster is unmasked as someone exploiting a local legend for personal gain. 25 episodes, 25 times this exact plot played out. The writers didn't even try to hide it. Joe Ruby, Ken Spears, and Bill Lutz wrote all 17 first-season scripts. They used the same formula every time because it was easier and cheaper. Create the formula once, change the monster, change the location, change the villain's motive. Everything else stays the same. Fred splits up the gang the same way. Shaggy and Scooby find the monster first. Velma loses her glasses. Daphne falls through a trap door. The chase scene happens to upbeat music. The trap fails initially before succeeding. The writer's defense was that kids like repetition. Predictable patterns give children a sense of security. The reality was that writing the same plot 25 times was significantly cheaper and faster than creating unique stories. Animation was expensive. Writing was one place you could save money by recycling structures, and from a production standpoint, the formula allowed them to reuse backgrounds, monster designs, and chase sequences. Animation cells from one episode could be repurposed for another with minor modifications. Critics mocked the repetitive nature of the show. How could kids watch the same plot over and over? But the formula worked so well that it ran unchanged for over 50 years. Modern Scooby-Doo shows still use variations of the same structure. Lazy writing accidentally became genius. Number 5. The executive named Fred after himself, then stole all the credit. The original character who would become Fred Jones was named Ronnie. When Fred Silverman, the CBS executive in charge of children's programming, got involved with revising the show, he changed the character's name to Fred, named after himself. The ultimate ego move. Silverman made virtually every major decision that shaped Scooby-Doo into what it became. He changed character names, added the dog, renamed the dog, approved the final title, and pushed for the comedic tone that replaced the scarier original concept. Without Silverman's involvement, the show would have been rejected permanently. Joe Ruby and Ken Spears created the show. They wrote it, developed the characters, came up with the mystery formula, designed the entire concept from scratch. But when the show became a success, Fred Silverman took a lot of the credit in public. Press events would feature Silverman talking about his vision for Scooby-Doo. Articles would mention Silverman's involvement prominently, while Ruby and Spears got smaller credits buried further down. The public perception became that Silverman created the show, when really he was an executive who made smart decisions about someone else's creation. Ruby and Spears were reportedly bitter about this, but stayed silent. They needed the paycheck, and antagonizing a powerful CBS executive wasn't a smart career move. Silverman had the power to greenlight or kill any future projects they pitched. The legacy issue persists today. When people discuss Scooby-Doo's creation, Silverman's name comes up as often as Ruby and Spears. Some retrospectives position him as the creator rather than the executive who greenlit and shaped it. Animation historian Marc Evanier has spent years correcting the record. The man who rejected the show twice gets remembered as the genius who made it happen, and the main character bears his name forever. Number 4, Casey Kasem's final performance was saying goodbye to Shaggy forever. In 2010, Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated premiered with a new cast. Matthew Lillard, who'd played Shaggy in the 2002 and 2004 live-action films, took over as the voice of Shaggy in the animated series. Casey Kasem, who was 81 years old and semi-retired, agreed to appear in the show, but he didn't voice Shaggy. He voiced Shaggy's father, Colton Rogers, in a recurring role that would span both seasons. In one of the final episodes, there's a scene where Kasem's character talks to Lillard's Shaggy. The dialogue is about a father being proud of his son, about passing down values and watching someone grow into who they're meant to be. The father tells the son that he's done well, that he's become a good person, that the values matter more than anything else. On set, Kasem was reportedly emotional during the recording. He knew what this meant. This was goodbye, not just to this series, but to the character he'd defined for over 40 years across multiple generations. Matthew Lillard later said he was crying during his recording session for that scene. He understood what was happening. This wasn't just a father-son conversation in a cartoon. This was one actor symbolically passing the character to another. The metatextual layer made it devastating for everyone involved. After Mystery Incorporated ended in 2013, Kasem retired from voice acting completely. He'd done Shaggy's voice from 1969 to 1997, then 2002 to 2009, with guest appearances through 2010. Over 40 years of service to one character. He died in 2014 at the age of 82. When the news broke, fans around the world mourned not just the voice actor, but the voice that had defined their childhoods. That final scene remains one of the most touching moments in Scooby-Doo history. Number 3, the cartoon. Too Scary for Kids became therapy for traumatized children. In 1968 and 1969, America was experiencing unprecedented violence. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot in April 1968. Robert F. Kennedy was shot in June 1968. The Vietnam War was televised nightly, bringing images of death into living rooms across the country. Kids were watching this constantly. The news was unavoidable. Parents tried to shield children from it, but couldn't completely control what appeared on television screens during dinner time. Then parent groups decided cartoon monsters were too frightening and demanded their removal from Saturday morning programming. The irony was staggering. Real violence acceptable, fake monsters are too scary. CBS rejected Scooby-Doo initially because the artwork looked too frightening. After revisions that made it more comedic, the show finally got approved and premiered in September 1969. And something unexpected happened. The show became a safe space for kids processing trauma. Every episode followed the same pattern. Kids encountered something scary. They investigated. They discovered it wasn't supernatural, just a person in a disguise. The monster was unmasked, the mystery solved, and order restored. Child psychologists later noted that Scooby-Doo taught an entire generation that fear could be conquered through rational investigation. Monsters weren't real. Every scary thing had a logical explanation. You just had to be brave enough to pull off the mask. For kids living through a chaotic, violent time, that message was therapeutic. The predictable formula that critics mocked became comfort food. Kids knew exactly what would happen, and that predictability was soothing. Number 2. The show CBS rejected twice became the longest-running animated franchise ever. In 1968, Hanna-Barbera was facing potential bankruptcy after all their action shows got canceled. Desperate for something that would satisfy networks and parent watchdog groups, Joe Ruby and Ken Spears created Mysteries 5, a show about 5 teenagers in a band solving mysteries. Fred Silverman didn't like it, told them to revise. They revised it, added a dog, renamed it Who's SS Scared. CBS executives saw the presentation artwork and rejected it for being too frightening for children. First rejection. Silverman went back to Ruby and Spears again. Make it more comedic. Tone down scary elements. Focus on the dog. They revised again. Named the dog Scooby-Doo. Renamed the show Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? CBS barely approved it. The show premiered to massive ratings, 65% of Saturday morning viewers. Then it got canceled after 2 seasons anyway. 25 episodes and done. Except reruns kept it alive. Kids watched the same episodes over and over. When CBS brought it back in 1972 as the new Scooby-Doo movies, it worked again. The franchise exploded from there. Over 50 years of continuous production. Hundreds of episodes across dozens of different series. Multiple theatrical films, including a 2020 animated feature that earned over $28 million during the pandemic. Direct-to-video movies that have sold millions of copies. Video games, comic books, merchandise generating billions in revenue. Frank Welker is still voicing Fred 55 years after the original premiere. He also voices Scooby-Doo now, meaning he voices both characters simultaneously. The cultural impact is undeniable. Meddling kids became part of the language. Scooby snacks became real products. The Mystery Machine is one of the most recognizable vehicles in pop culture. Number 1. From political violence to billion-dollar comfort food. Robert F. Kennedy was shot on June 5, 1968. A show about cartoon monsters got rejected for being too scary, and somehow these 2 events created a franchise that would comfort children for over 50 years. Kennedy's murder created a moral panic that canceled violent cartoons. The cancellations nearly bankrupted Hanna-Barbera. The studio desperately needed something non-violent that would satisfy parent watchdog groups. The result was a show where monsters were never real, violence never happened, and every mystery ended with a rational explanation. Kids were never in actual danger. For a generation of children watching real violence on television every night, Scooby-Doo became therapy. The show taught them that fear could be investigated, understood, and conquered. That the scariest things often have simple explanations, that bravery and friendship can solve any problem. The formula that critics called lazy and repetitive was actually brilliant psychology. Kids needed predictability during chaos. They needed to know that every episode would end the same way, with the gang safe and the mystery solved. 50 years later, the show born from political violence has generated billions in revenue, created hundreds of episodes, and become comfort food for multiple generations. Parents who watched it in 1969 will show it to grandchildren in 2026. And there you have it, 15 weird facts about the show that almost never existed, but changed Saturday mornings forever. Which fact shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments. Hit that like button if this brought back memories of Saturday morning cartoons. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the shows that raised us. See you in the next one.